Good morning, good evening. Whoever you are, wherever you are, whatever you might be doing, we wish to welcome you to the Silverlight Show. The Silverlight shines to illuminate that which lies hidden in darkness. For those of you joining us here today, we wish to welcome you in. I live on a cul-de-sac, as it's so politely called, or a keyhole drive, as some other people might call it. And one of the luxuries of that is having everybody else's trash come up on my front doorstep. It's just the way the winds work. It's just the way the times work. I don't get mad at people for that. But there's a lot of really interesting stuff that shows up in Silverlight's front yard. I've said this before, McDonald's stuff. I haven't been to McDonald's in years. But it still manages to show up. It also wouldn't be anything I would order there. And that's why I'm back to focusing on that big high-density apartment building about a kilometer and a half, 2 kilometers away. Because you know what? Given time, all that's going to fall. It's either going to need to be taken down or it's going to be broken down. One or the other. Time advances. Things change. And that's a universal truth. Whether it's here, on the moon, at the opposite side of the galaxy, in other dimensions, time still passes. And things decay. Whether it's particles decaying over time, whether it's the entire universe itself is going to decay over time. Even the photons themselves will rip themselves apart and decay. And this is why, quite honestly, I don't give a lot of credence to the idea of ancient astronauts. I don't give a lot of credence to the idea of lost civilizations. Because the idea that there's evidence sitting around today is, quite frankly, ludicrous. The pyramids are excellent examples. But keep in mind, the pyramids have been maintained continuously for thousands of years. They've always been known as a tourist attraction. And in Cairo and anywhere else that Egypt happened to have its capital, they knew keeping them above the sand was going to attract visitors and going to give them some tax money. So the pyramids are pretty well kept up. The Sphinx has remained covered for most of its life, which is why the face shows so much erosion, whereas the rest of its body does not. And those were made of granite. They used to have a limestone cover on them, which was designed to protect them. But that was stolen off them because limestone is a valuable building material. And I mean, I'm not going to pass judgment on the people that did it. Personally, I don't like when anybody violates an archaeological site. But people are going to do it no matter what I think. Simply the way things are. I also have the same logic for those Confederate statues. Yes, they're not comfortable, but just put a plaque beside them saying, yes, this person fought bravely, but they were also a slave owner and did this and did that. You know, that solves the problem, in my opinion. At least for anybody who reads, and we're supposed to be a highly literate society. Back to ancient aliens and outside influences on humanity and all the interesting architecture we find when we look in the past. The number one problem with the pyramids is that people think a single monarch built them. That Cheops, the Pharaoh of Egypt, was the one who came along and said in his lifetime he wanted a magnificent tomb. Well, logic doesn't hold up for that. First of all, economically and strategically, and it was impossible to assemble the infrastructure in one person's lifetime to assemble them. There's a lot of rock that goes into that, and the old statistic about one block being laid perfectly every 2 seconds, yeah, that's true if you consider it over a 50 to 60 year time frame. But what if we consider, just like today, where a politician will commission something to be built, a stadium, a amphitheater, whatever have you. And, they're not in office by the time the thing gets completed. This happens quite a bit. And their successor comes up, signs their name to it, I, the successor to, well, they wouldn't say successor, they just say I, the mayor, the whatever it is, dedicate this hall to a musical. Let's just pick on a musical. The same was true in the ancient world. If you put your name on something, you owned it. And this is a very common practice. And it's also not beyond the idea that humans could build the pyramids. They had the technical capacity. Pyramid is not a particularly complex design. Yes, we can get into individual intricacies, how the Great Pyramids have a greater angle than the other pyramids built in Egypt, blah, blah, blah. But at the same token, if you remove the time constraint of one ruler, everything becomes very possible. For years, the Easter Island statues were a mystery. No one knew how they could be erected. And then one day, the archaeologists actually asked the people. And the people said, yeah, we know how to build them. And, they brought them some food, they brought them some money, and they had one of those Moai statues up and around a week. Nobody had done it, but they still knew how their ancestors had done it. So even though the Egyptians theoretically only had copper and bronze instruments, which that's all that have survived, but copper and bronze tend to survive a heck of a lot longer than iron does. They all rust, but copper and bronze don't. So I would suggest iron tools would have been highly valued, they would have been passed down, and they would have been used for multiple pyramid constructions until they eventually got so old and rusted out. Yes, typically Egyptians used copper and bronze, but not exclusively. It never says there is a taboo against iron, and other nations were using iron quite successfully at that point. And if you're building a mega structure, a super project, doesn't it make sense to spend some money to make sure your workers have the right tools for the job? So the objection being that the ancient Egyptians only had bronze pickaxes to work granite, and granite is much harder than bronze. Yes, I grant you that. But it's not harder than iron. And again, if we expand that 80-year, let's give a whole person's lifetime, between 60 and 80 years. And the pharaohs were relatively well kept care of, so let's give the full 80 years. Let's get rid of that and say they were commissioned over 100 to 120 years. Even longer, possibly. What if the entire Giza site was put together as a massive project? And I submit this because somebody had to level the darn thing. That's right, the Giza Plateau was artificially leveled. So well before any of the pharaohs had the idea of putting a stone up, some poor sap was out there with some sort of implement making sure the entire place was level before they laid a single stone or dug down into it for its foundation. This is a sign of a very human operation. In the present day, we would just probably pour it in concrete. Just like the building that we're seeing now. It's pretty much concrete and steel. And yep, that's pretty much the building. Now, concrete and steel are going to decay over time. Whereas the pyramids, being made of granite and limestone, very naturally occurring things, very, very strong materials indeed, are going to last much longer. But just as the concrete and the steel in those apartments are going to fall apart, probably within the next 100 years, give or take. Maybe less, they're already about 30, 40 years old at this point. The pyramids will eventually decay as well. And this is why finding ancient astronauts or even the remains of other civilizations on other planets is very unlikely. If ancient astronauts came down, there'd be no reason for them to leave. I mean, here they have this garden planet where they have humanity blossoming, they have this race of servants or whatever the heck they had in their mind. Why would they leave? Why would they do anything other than enjoy being godlike creatures and have their superiority over absolutely everybody on the planet? You'd be living like a king, literally a king. You'd probably be living like a god, commanding kings. If we get off the planet, we get into other problems. Because Earth has this wonderful shield around it called the atmosphere. So when meteorites come crashing down, we're protected. The Chinese and the Russians apparently had one of their rockets crash into one of their satellites back in March. This stuff is all going to fall back to Earth eventually. But it's small enough that nobody really needs to worry about it. The International Space Station is the opposite. It is big enough that it can survive re-entry and do a lot of damage, which is one of the reasons I'm glad to see NASA is refurbishing it slowly, giving it better power cells, trying to extend its life a little bit. Because it doesn't really have a replacement. Their next space station is going to be halfway to the moon. And to be quite honest, the International Space Station serves its job pretty well for a 23-year-old piece of technology that was not designed to operate this long. It's funny how when NASA does stuff, they set up a rover that's supposed to have a 3-year life and it winds up lasting for 10 years. And yet we can't get a car that will go further than its warranty. Just a side observation there. Back on the main point. Architecture is wonderful, but any sort of remains that are going to be left over are going to have to be shielded. They're going to have to be underground. They're going to have to be well protected. That's the same whether here, the moon, Mars, Mercury, wherever the heck you decide to put those remains, they would need to be underground. And a spaceship passing over a place is not really doing a lot of looking underground. And even if it does, it would have to find something pretty significant for it to bother investigating it. After all, there's millions of caves on this planet alone that have never been explored. The same is true to every other body in this solar system and everywhere else in the universe. So you'd have to put out a pretty big signal to make sure that the spaceship going by says, "Oh, that's interesting, let's drop down there and have a look." The ancient aliens have left us nothing that cannot be explained by human ingenuity. The Anchithera mechanism, very advanced for its time. But I mean, there have always been people that have been tinkering at the advanced end of any of their fields. The Wright brothers, at their time, people were using gliders, but they were determined to put an engine on their plane and keep it going. You know what? They didn't get significantly further than one of their gliders. As a matter of fact, their first flights, they flew not as far as their gliders. But it was just their determination. And there are apocryphal evidence of other people having flown first. They might have, but that evidence is lost to time. It's barely 120 years, and we already cannot say for sure who was the first one with powered flight. So how the heck can we say what happened thousands of years ago? The only thing we know for sure is that humans were here and humans are smart. The Roman concrete, they could pour that stuff underwater and it would harden. It's still good today. We can barely produce concrete that will do the same thing, harden underwater and do all that sort of thing. And the Romans were doing it 2,000 years ago. Greek fire, which was basically napalm in the medieval world. Nobody knows how to do that today, but they were using it constantly for almost 600 years. The recipe was carefully and closely guarded. The Emperor Vespasian, while he was rebuilding the capital of Rome after the Civil War, he had a man come up to him who had a machine that would do the work of all the men carrying stuff up the hill. Vespasian gave him shut-up money because Vespasian said, "I must ensure all my men can make their daily bread." Fantastic social responsibility from Emperor Vespasian, but horrible for the technology that was being presented to him. Yes, rebuild Rome, but that technology might have been very useful immediately afterward. Admittedly, it probably involved horses or something like that, but at the same token, it was a gearing mechanism. And if we're talking the Emperor of Rome, about 100 years or so after the Anchithera mechanism being presented with a mass way to reduce labor costs, I think the Anchithera mechanism is also within human providence. There's nothing on this planet that looks distinctly alien. Pyramids. Children build them in the sandbox all the time. The great walls that the Aztec put up, joined together fantastically, but at the same token, if you give them time, people can do anything. And that's something we don't recognize in ourselves. Humans are very clever. Humans are very smart. Right now, we don't look like it. We're all still panicked about a virus, legitimately. We're all still panicked about wars in the Middle East, legitimately. We're all still wondering about why Afghanistan is going back to the Taliban, legitimately. All are legitimate concerns. I'm not going to shoot down anyone's ideas or thought processes here. But the fact is, if you look at it, I'm not seeing the dolphins or the octopi putting anything into place, and the octopi are not scrawling languages and learning and building structures. Crows can use tools. They're not doing anything particularly unusual. Everything on this planet bears the handmark of humankind and of nature. Nothing else. And that's what we forget. Humans are clever. We've had hundreds of thousands of years to shape our environment, going back to the very dawn of humanity, back to the Australopithecines, when we were just barely different from the chimpanzees. So we've had millions of years to reshape our planet. And we don't even know how far the Australopithecines and the early Homo erectus, Homo habilis, all those versions of ourselves got to, or what they did. There is evidence that Homo erectus was using sailing craft of some description. Maybe not sailing, but they somehow made it to the southern tip of Europe while the Mediterranean Sea was still there. That's a heck of a long way to go, especially if you consider you're working with stone tools and your personal ingenuity. That is better than the space program today. At least with the space program, we know if you put enough fuel and oxygen onto something, you can put humans anywhere you want to go. But when you are literally the first being that has tried to cross that gap, that is a shot in the dark. But again, it is a uniquely human shot in the dark. The idea that if I get over there, they've got good stuff over there, I can take advantage of it. That's what Elon Musk is doing. If I can get to Mars, I can take advantage of a unique situation over there. That's why Jeff Bezos is busy trying to sue everybody, is because Elon Musk is so far ahead of him and he wants back into the game, and his legal team is the only chance he really does have to leverage his space program because Elon Musk is more advanced. It's that simple. Bezos did not take it really seriously as soon as Elon Musk did, so one person developed their technology sooner than the other person did. Naturally, Musk would land the contract. And while Bezos was concentrating on having his ride to space for himself and his friends, Musk was busy concentrating on Mars, on the next step. And that's uniquely human. They're concentrating on the next step. Humans don't consciously plan for the future, but they do it all the time. Well, that's not the right way to say it. Humans don't intentionally plan for beyond their death because they plan on living forever subconsciously. Nobody likes to contemplate their own death. So even if you put out a 100-year project that's going to revolutionize humanity, which, quite frankly, we need, that'll probably be my next episode. But what it does mean is that all the wonders on this planet belong to us. We're a fantastic species, and we need to remember that. We need to be smarter. We need to be more inventive. We need to be more ingenuous. because humans can do almost everything. The pyramids prove it. The Hanging Gardens of Babylon prove it. The Colossus of Rhodes proves it. And you know what? It's time for us to prove that we can do better. We wish to thank you for joining us for the Silverlight Show. If you enjoyed this video, please like, share, and subscribe. And once again, thank you all, and we hope you have a fantastic day.